Good evening or late afternoon. Welcome. I'm David Nirenberg, the director and the Levy professor here, and I'm glad to welcome you to this conversation about the place and practice of the arts and sciences in the past, present, and future of humanity. There's a big topic. And we've spoken so far on museums, universities, foundations, opera, biography, and of course the most important cultural form known to humanity, the Institute for Advanced Study. Today we're going to talk about ballet and its past, present, and future. But it's worth pointing out that many cultural forms are interrelated and subject to similar pressures and transformations. And I'm going to make the point through an anecdote. The Institute's first professor, Albert Einstein, arrived in the United States at the same time, the same day, October 17th, 1933, as the founder of the School of American Ballet, George Balanchine. Einstein arrived on the Western land, and Balanchine came on the Olympic. Ships had grandiose names back then. Which is to say that the Institute for Advanced Study and the first School of American Ballet were both products of the great geopolitical and cultural spasms that transformed the possibilities for all the arts and sciences and for so much else in Europe, the United States, and throughout the world in the mid-20th century. Now, we too are living in a moment of transformation, of geopolitical fragmentation, of technological challenges to the social, political, and economic orders of the present, of changing attitudes toward institutional and cultural authority. So our conversation today will explore how ballet has been transformed through time and how it's being transformed today. And it's difficult to imagine better interlocutors for such a conversation than my guests today, Jennifer Homans and Tamara Rojo. Jennifer Homans is the dance critic for The New Yorker and author of Mr. B, George Balanchine's 20th Century, the first major biography of the great choreographer, who the New York Times once called the Shakespeare of dancing. Mr. B, published in 2022, and a fantastic book, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the second of Jennifer's books to be a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Jennifer's first finalist was her book, Apollo's Angels, A History of Ballet, published in 2010, which was one of the New York Times 10 best books of the year. The Times Book Review called it, quote, the only truly definitive history of the most impossibly fantastic art form, ballet, an eloquent and lasting elegy to an unlasting art. That's actually a really good sentence. I didn't write it, New York Times, 2010. Jennifer is also a former professional dancer and performed with the Pacific Northwest Ballet before earning a BA at Columbia University and a PhD in modern European history at NYU, where she is now a distinguished scholar in residence and the founding director of the Center for Ballet and the Arts. Tamara Rojo is a celebrated principal dancer turned cultural impresario who is now entering her second full season as artistic director of the San Francisco Ballet, and she's the first female director in the company's 89-year history. She came to San Francisco Ballet after a transformative 9.5 years as artistic director and lead principal of London's English National Ballet. And prior to her directorship of the English National Ballet, she was a principal dancer at the Royal Ballet for over a decade, following a role as a principal at ENB in the 1990s. Her acclaimed dance repertoire includes lead roles in all full-length ballet classics, as well as works by Jerome Robbins, Sir Kenneth Macmillan, and of course, George Balanchine. Raised in Madrid, Tamara received her bachelor's degree in dance and choreography at the Real Conservatorio de Danza Mariema and received a master's in theatrical arts as well as a doctorate from the University del Rey Juan Carlos de Madrid for a splendid dissertation, which you can buy from Penguin Random House, but you must read Spanish, called Perfil Psicológico de un Bailarín de Alto Nivel. Tamara has received countless awards for artistic excellence, including Spain's 3 highest honors, the Gold Medal of Fine Arts, the Prince of Asturias Art Award, and the Encomienda de Número de la Reina Isabel la Católica, as well as the Kennedy Center Gold Medal for the Fine Arts, the Order of the British Empire for Distinguished Service to Ballet, and 2 Laurence Olivier Awards. Jennifer and Tamara, please, welcome to the Institute. Perhaps we could start with a look to the past. From your book, I learned how ballet survived the French Revolution and transformed itself from an aristocratic amusement to a force to regenerate the masses. And from your book, I learned how it survived the Russian Revolution and went from being an imperial patronage art form to the vanguard of the Soviet future. What makes ballet such an adaptive, such a transformative form?
Okay, I'll begin as a historian here. I think there are two things that I could point to. The first is that at its origins in the 17th century courts of Europe, ballet was really born of the way people were living in that court. It was born from etiquette, from the patterns of life, the ways that people moved through their worlds, so that it always had a connection to the people doing it and that moment there now, in addition to beliefs about cosmology and the harmony of the spheres. If you think about the patterns in a ballet, that's where they came from originally. And then, there's something about the technique that was invented, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts about this, especially Tamara, which had that etiquette and ornament to it in the court, the very polite, elegant ways of behaving, the idea that there's not going to be any work shown here because it's an aristocratic art, so it's all going to be, nobody works. So we're going to just be very, no sweat, nothing, very easy. It's going to look easy even if it's not. All of that came from this aristocratic form, but the actual technique is geometric and physical. And it doesn't require you to speak. So many of the signs of class are easily wiped away. And if you want to transform that or change it, you can. You've got a kind of blueprint that's pretty basic and has to do with symmetries and the form of the body. So it then is possible to, in the course of revolution and economic change and great political and intellectual changes across history, to sort of take that form and bring a new street, as it were, to the stage, a new idea about people, which you've been a part of some of those moments.
I agree with all of that, especially the language. I also think that two more things could be key about this amazing transformation, such quick transformation of an art form from being so intrinsically linked to aristocracy to being like the flagship of revolution. One is the performers are very young, by definition. So it's very quick to erase a previous generation. If so, a generation was linked to the aristocracy, if they were, in the case of Russia, the lovers of the Tsar, the moment they travel to Paris, they don't exist anymore. There's no evidence of such link. It's a new generation of dancers. They're fresh from the school. Nobody knows their past. So it's easy to transform the artist. And in the same way, because the works don't exist if they're not performed, they're not like literature or a play. Somebody can say there were no Nazi plays, but you find them, because they were written, or you have the evidence of the art being on service of something. In ballet, you have no evidence.
That's what Valentin called ephemeral.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have no evidence. If they're not performed, if the works that were done in honor of the Tsar or in honor of King Louis were not performed, then they never existed. You can just make up new works. And the new works can mean whatever it needs to be, so we survive. And so it's incredibly fast to adapt, because it's for the better and very often for the worse of our art form, very quick to erase.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And there's a way in the fact that it's not possible to write it down, or nobody's figured out how to do that in a way that's used by
even by the professionals.
Even by the professionals, right? That it does evaporate. And so that makes it possible for it to be reconstituted in any image. So just to give you an example of this, you know, Balanchine made over 400 dances in the course of his life. We know this by looking at old programs and things like that. Only, I would say, under 100 exist today. And if you try to put together a dance that maybe the people who did it are still alive, it's very, very hard. Even then, they don't remember often what they did. And if they do, they remember only their part.
Yeah.
So they only know what they did.
Yes.
They don't know what the whole thing looked like. So there's really, you know, film has changed this a bit. And I wonder, you know, what that does to things.
Well, I think we're about to see an example of that, because I wanted to show an example of a ballet that is one of those transformative moments.
Yeah.
So that's Agon, George Balanchine's, but he called his ballet to end all ballets. He saw it as the sum of everything from the 16th to the 20th century that would explode it all, he said. So let's show a clip. I should have said the music was by Igor Stravinsky, because when you're talking about Balanchine, you always have to mention also the composer. So I have two questions. One, I was going to ask you, what makes this ballet so transformative, such a seminal work? But now, in the light of what you were just saying about the ephemera and about it never being the same, to what degree is this performance from the 75th anniversary of the New York City Ballet, so very recently, the same as Balanchine's Agon?
Do you want to go?
No, you go.
Okay, I'll go. I mean, this ballet, so 1957, it's a work that, as you said, changes everything. It's known as the seminal ballet. It's not the first, but it's the ballet that really brings abstraction to dance. So even if you think of the Les Sylphides, La Swan Lake, and you know, something like that, that is, those are the 19th century classics. And the idea of having a stage with decor and costume and of people trying to act to become something else, all of that is wiped away. And you've got just the body in practice clothes to music with light. And it's often facing front. I don't know if you noticed that. And the camera actually changes that a bit, which is interesting. So that goes to your second part of your question. But it had a kind of almost flat surface feel, like an abstract painting. So that's, and the other reason that it was very radical at the time was that, unlike this production that you just saw, the pas de deux, which is part of a, you know, there are 12 dancers, it's a 12-tone piece. This is the pas de deux in the middle that you saw, about 2 minutes of a 6-minute pas de deux, which was originally danced by Arthur Mitchell and Diana Adams, a black man and a white woman in 1957, not long after Little Rock, at a moment when a dance that's so revealing of the human form and has, we didn't see it quite so much in this excerpt, but a lot of very sexualized movement in it. It was just something that had not been possible. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure you
How
have...
different it is, quite different, I would say, from the original performance. And I think that goes back to what we were saying before about the ability of dancers to remember what the original was. And I was doing some research for Raimonda when I choreographed a new version of Raimonda at Harvard University, where they have the original transcripts of the original productions of Raimonda. And even when you see the original transcripts, you see 5 versions of the same solo, because each ballerina changed it. And then each ballerina at the time, in the imperial ballets, had their own solo that they perform at every ballet. So you will go and see Swan Lake, and if it was Czesinskaya, she would do the trumpet solo from Corsair, because she was famous for that. And the audience will come to see Czesinskaya. So at some point in Swan Lake, she had to include the trumpet solo from Corsair. And you see that in the scriptures of Raimonda. So even then, there is no original. And it happened very often that with Balanchine. I've had rehearsals of the same ballets with different ladies that were original dancers of Balanchine. And I remember once we were doing Jewels at the Royal Ballet, and I was Emeralds. And I had one lady that rehearsed me in Emeralds, and then there was another one rehearsing Rubies, and another one rehearsing Diamonds. And they all watch each other's rehearsals, and then they will hand me down the corridors to say, she's teaching you wrong. That's not how he did it. You should do this and that and the other. And then another one will hand me in the canteen, don't listen to her. I was there, I did it this way. So even they cannot agree into what is the original work.
And what do you do when that happens?
Oh, hide. Because they are all very mighty ladies. Yeah, hide. And then just go out there and pray. Do your version of their versions.
I mean, those are the version, I call those the version wars.
Yes.
But this gives new meaning to the phrase anxiety of influence. The influence is chasing you down the hall.
It is. And they hate each other for some reason.
Yeah, where they're competing. They're competing.
Yes.
And this is something that is like built into the art form, I think, really.
I think very much definitely in Balanchine, they were competing for the attention of Mr. B.
Yeah.
So that translated in a lot of ways. But yes, there is a competitiveness in the professional psyche of...
That never happens amongst professors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I could shift the discussion a little bit towards collaboration, because ballet is, at least as it emerges from your book, Denny, it's such a, don't know what to call it, it's such a smorgasbord of art forms, right? You have the impresario, like Diaghilev, or the composer, so Stravinsky, the choreographer, Balanchine, costumes by the most famous fashion designers of the day, sets by Picasso or Chagall, and then many other leading artists, sometimes even librettos by W.H. Auden works so closely with. And we haven't even talked about the dancers yet. So Jenny, I want to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the importance of the collaborative bacchanalia to the adaptive power of ballet.
Yeah, I mean, because you've got so many parts, as you say, it's like the natural multidisciplinary art. It was really is a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, as Diaghilev used to think about it. And it means that you can change those parts. So you can decide, as people do often today, if I'm not mistaken, okay, well, we're going to do the same choreography that we think we know the version of, maybe, but we're going to change the sets, or we're going to add a new costume, and so there's a way in which the gathering of the artists together and the chaos that can produce, in addition to the coordination that can produce, gives it a sort of, who's the author? There's so many authors, so there's many possible future authors as well, and it has a certain malleability to it, I think, that, as you said, the performance can be different every time it's staged. Yeah.
And we saw that recently at San Francisco Ballet. We did Balanchine's A Midsummer Night's Dream, his first full-length narrative work. But I brought the designs by Christian Lacroix, and it transformed the ballet. It was a completely different ballet. And it was a ballet that I was very familiar with. But somehow the designs that have been used in New Zealand Ballet gave it, in a way, a more contemporary look. And then Christian did what Christian does, which is everything and all, extraordinary jewelry everywhere, amazing color, and very baroque. And it suddenly became like almost like a classical ballet, like a Swan Lake. It had a different weight. The dancers, of course, when they wear a different costume, it weights differently, so you move differently. And so it changed the ballet completely. And I've seen it the other way around. When you do Manon with the original designs by the Royal Ballet, those costumes are very heavy, like real leathers and real velvets. And then there is the Danish design. It's all net and tutu. It makes it frothy. it makes the ballet frothy. You can't get down, you can't center yourself because everything is light and tutu is all over your face. There's nothing sensual about tutu, like, it doesn't cling to anything. It's all over everyone's. So even that, and I had so many conversations with people that preserves the legacy of Roland Petit or the legacy of Béjart. And often I say to them, the audience cannot connect to these ballets anymore because of the way they look. But the choreography and the music is still worthy. Please consider changing the designs. And it needs almost like a whole generation to pass because people are emotionally attached to how a ballet should look for that transformation to exist.
The night is still young, but I think the line, "There's nothing sensual about tutu," is going to be one of the contenders for the night. You're the artistic director of one of the most innovative ballet companies today. And I'm wondering if the kinds of collaborations that are animating ballet today, how similar or how different are they? For example, the intimate collaboration between Balanchine and Stravinsky or Balanchine and composers, is that the kind of collaboration that animates ballet today? Or are there other collaborations, other forms of interaction between the arts that are really driving contemporary ballet?
It's a tough question.
Yeah,
I don't see right now that kind of high-level collaboration between choreographers and composers, for example. I've tried to manufacture that with the production of Mere Mortals by being, by commanding the collaboration. Exactly. Literally locking them in a room for a week and making them work together. But the default position today of most choreographers is to work always with people they feel comfortable with. And there's also another issue, which is not all, but most of today's dance professionals, ballet professionals, don't know how to read or write music. And that means that the only way choreographers can choose music is by listening to it. So they tend to rely on existing music, which for me is a very dangerous situation. Because if we are honest, when we look at how does the ballet canon survive, it's not the choreography. We don't really know, or we can find out, but nobody's really doing the original petit pas, other than Rosmansky. It's not the designs, those change. It's not the dances, they pass away. It's the score. We redo Rite of Spring a million times. We redo Swan Lake a million times. We redo because of the score and because that inspires new generations of choreographers, dancers, designers. And so I think we need to think about that, really reflect on how are we using music today and the kind of relationship we're having with contemporary composers and what kind of legacy are we leaving.
And I'm curious, too, what you think about because another problem that I see, and I agree with everything that you've just said, is that a lot of music that is chosen today is electronic.
Yes.
Not all, but a lot, more than, I would say the balance is in that court. And it's not that ballet has to have a certain kind of music. It's had very different kinds of music over its history. But I just wonder what you think about how that is changing, because that is a collaboration more with a machine or a designer. It's just a different kind of thing. And the way in which, as you say, you listen. One of my favorite images of Balanchine actually is that I found this picture where he's sitting in bed and he's reading a score. And he insisted on the fact that he didn't listen to music, he read music. And that's because a lot of his choreography was so based on his analytic interpretation of a musical score, so that it's just a whole different model.
And he made his own reductions.
And he made his own reductions. He was a highly trained musician, unlike the dancers that you're talking about today. And that's to me just a like sea change in the way that artists are made. And I mean, what do you think?
Yes, I agree.
It changes the body, right? It must change the body to be dancing to something that has a different than the Western music organization. And this may be something that is necessary and even good, but
yes, I mean, I think often that is a choice that is a financial choice
okay,
rather than artistic choice, I would say.
because it's so expensive to have a symphony orchestra or a,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. So many companies, many venues choose to have a recording of something. Yeah.
The electronic music changes the body is in a way a very interesting segue. I mean, it takes us back to Agon, because in his program notes, Balanchine wrote that he was building an IBM electronic computer of a dance, and that he wanted his dancers to think like a machine. And in the notes, he refers to the IBM this IBM computer is the first commercially successful programmable computer using von Neumann logics. And I had to get that in there because that's my plug for the Institute for Advanced Study, John von Neumann, professor here. But he really saw this as in a sense, turning the dancer's brain, don't think, calculate, right? And Tamara, your first commissioned work for the San Francisco Ballet was Mere Mortals. And I'm trying to think about how the present is animated by similar engagements with what's going on around it. Mere Mortals, which is a ballet about Pandora's box and society's relationship with artificial intelligence. Let's show a clip. Since we're exploring how the present informs animation of art forms, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about Mere Mortals. Why was it your choice for your first major production, and how did it come into being?
I think one of the things that consumed me as artistic director is how to keep the ballet relevant to the audiences of today, especially post-pandemic, how to attract new audiences in an era when they have so many choices for entertainment. And of course, you know, when I was given the opportunity of being the director of San Francisco Ballet, I started to think about what is San Francisco, what is California, what is known about, and what are the conversations happening there. And I think more than here, it's really loud, the artificial intelligence conversation. It's a very confrontational conversation in San Francisco between artists and coders. And there's all kinds of accusations between both. And so it was a big conflict. And I always hope for the best. I always thought, well, there have been other revolutions, other industrial steps forward that have had many good and bad consequences. And could there be a place where this tool could just be that, a tool for artists to use? And so I had met Floating Points, who is a DJ, electronic music DJ, but his real name is Sam Shepard. He is an English gentleman who happens to also be, as well as one of the most famous DJs like Coachella and Portola Festival kind of DJ. He's a neuroscientist and he's a classically trained musician. And his girlfriend happened to be a dancer. That's how we met. And he said to me the first time we met, I want to do a ballet. And I said, okay, let's do it. And so we sat together and we started to discuss ideas. And we very quickly agreed that artificial intelligence was something we wanted to explore. But I always felt that the way to talk about something present in a constructive manner is by using something else, is by using another parable, another story of the past that doesn't create so much emotion and that gives us some perspective. And so we worked with a writer, but also with the choreographer, Asher Barton, to find what would be the angle in which we could present the philosophical questions that humanity should be asking itself when developing something that we don't know the power of. And then I was also listening to Natalie Hines. She's an English historian, and she's a comedian, very funny woman, and she wrote a book about Pandora. And that's where we came to the conclusion that Pandora and Prometheus, so it's both myths that we mix in Mere Mortals. You know, the stealing of the fire, which is knowledge or power, from the gods, the vengeance of the gods through Pandora, the first woman, the curiosity of humanity. All of that came together for this piece. And then we brought in Hamel Industries. It's a Barcelona-based design team that uses new technology with traditional artisan. So we were very conscious that we wanted to use we wanted to lead in how artists can use artificial intelligence in an ethical way. So we created all of our own images. We hired a photographer who took 500 images of 2 dancers, and it was that image that then we put through some kind of artificial intelligence that I don't understand, but that didn't take anything from the server. And then we created the images that were at the back, some of the images that were at the back. And there's other parts where Pandora is being created from clay and all of those things. So the visuals were a combination of artisan and new artificial intelligence. The music is the entire orchestra. We had 70 musicians, but also is fed back through 3 electronic machines and a bucla. So what Sam did is that he had also musicians play in another room, and that was fed through his DJ. So a lot of the percussion you hear is actually the acoustic sound through an electronic computer at the same time as the orchestra is in the pit. The designs were by Michelle Jank, who is an Australian designer that works with Asher Barton, the choreographer. And it was a difficult process, but it was definitely worth it. We had sold out houses for the first time in many, many years. We did an encore performance, so another 6 performances we added at the end of the season, which also sold out. We had visits from the Allen Institute. We had hundreds of people coming from Apple, from Google, from Adobe. So the first time, really, that the tech community has engaged with the ballet. So yeah, that's what we did.
Wow.
Exactly. Wow.
You running the center, you are also always trying to animate this kind of thinking. And I wonder what you're seeing there in terms of the kinds of this was a collaboration of one sort between all kinds of people you don't normally expect. Although if you think about even Balanchine, both thinking of mythic figures to ground the ballet and then taking from film, computing, anything around him, this is very much, but how do you see the present art form animating itself with its surroundings?
I mean, much in the same way, really. I think, I mean, this is the center that I run at NYU, where we have choreographers and other artists who are working on dance, along with scholars who are studying dance. And what I see is a lot of, is something very porous going on right now, where people are really sort of looking for ideas from each other, and which seems to be part of what you're talking about in this collaborative process, in addition to the exploration of maybe a third kind of partner, this machine partner. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually also curious just to ask you, was any of the choreography in that work generated by AI, or was that where you sort of laid down the...
Yes, we did not want to use it either for the writing of the music or the choreography, obviously the dancing, that we were all clear that had to be 100% human throughout.
Right.
But that suggests that you are worried about the potential of AI to affect the possibilities of ballet and dance as a form. What would your concerns be?
Or the erasure of artists altogether. I think there is a real possibility that composers will become replaced. Designers, we're already seeing it. You can already scan any room in your house and have AI create 10 versions of an interior design options for you. The same, of course, with costumes. I think the last, at least to the Island Institute theoretics, the last part would be the dancers themselves and the choreography, because it's the most complex. But I've already seen quite a lot of pretty realistic kind of movement creation created by AI. So I think a lot of the choreography, for example, of corps de ballet patterns, that could be replaced very quickly. I think there was already an exercise of that, actually, in the 1960s. So all of that is a real possibility in the next 20 years. I think the world would be much poorer if that happens to come, because all that the machine can do is rehash what has been done before. The machine is not capable of creating new ideas. It can only recycle. And it's not that artists don't do that. We don't just land from the moon and suddenly make a ballet. We all learn from the past, and we learn from each other, and we copy, and like Picasso, hopefully we do it better than the one before, but all you do is accumulate knowledge. But I think the spark of creativity, the spark of creation, the spark of God, whatever you want to call it, relies on humanity. And I think that, therefore, whatever comes out of this won't be surprising to anybody, and therefore won't be that exciting. But I could imagine very easily that every advertising company will use an AI to create the tunes for the adverts. And so very quickly, there will be very few jobs for artists, and therefore people will find alternatives.
And the other thing is that just listening to you, it occurs to me is that so much of dance, I mean, in a way, the whole premise of dance is two people and an interaction, a human interaction between two people, because you can't have a dance if you're going to be a choreographer and you are going to have a dancer. The only way a dance comes into being is by this interaction, and it is necessarily a human interaction. And so, what will be lost there if it's a machine that, if you take that equation out, if you remove that from the mix, it will be something very different.
Yeah.
And my other concern, which is quite different, is that what you are saying will happen, and there will be a sort of, but that it will happen in a tiered way that also reflects the inequalities in society, so that you will have an almost expensive elite taste for something that is creative and humanly driven, that will be out of reach for most people. And then there will be a sort of mass-generated art that will become the taste that is foisted on most people, and it's just obviously more available, right? So I worry about that. I don't know.
And I think to a certain extent that already is happening, and many artists are not honest. I think reggaeton is a perfect example of the rehashing and machine-made music. And people consume it, and it's, you can have 3 albums a month, if you want. So there is quite a lot of that being used already, I think. But it is, in my opinion, but that may show my age, very poor version of creativity.
I won't take a position on reggaeton because, but that was it may seem odd after a rather apocalyptic kind of vision to ask about the next generation. But in a way, one thing that ballet and the Institute for Advanced Study have in common is that we're very much about pushing the frontiers of our own practice. I think Abraham Flexner, when he founded the place, said it's about creating a space for researchers, scholars and their pupils to push the frontiers of discovery and train those who will carry on in this sense. Training is so important, the schooling of the next generation. And there's been a lot of change in ballet. I learned from your book, for example, that in the 19th century, ballet students had to learn geometry and study Euclid, and I suspect that that's not the case today. But could you talk a little bit about how you see this responsibility of training those who will carry on, and how younger generations might be interacting differently with that classical past?
I mean, I think there are many things that are shaping this generation, and a lot of them are external to the influence of what a ballet school can do. The pandemic was devastating in many ways, not just because it robbed dancers of 2 years of training, but it actually accustomed them to solitude in a way that I don't think is necessarily healthy, and made many of them dependent on social media for instant reward. And instant reward is an instant reward and instant validation is the very opposite of the practice of ballet. The practice of ballet is based on long-term investment with very little gratification. But also, for my generation, it was a journey of self-discovery as an artist as well. And for that, you needed to study. You didn't not just study your craft, as in your technique, but you needed to study other people's interpretations of a role you were about to do. And you needed to study, if you could, whatever was available. I remember that VHS tapes were like gold dust when I was a kid. And you could, we will swap VHS. I have Misha in Don Q. I can give you Kelsey Kirkland in Thema Variations. That was a practice, and that was a genuine curiosity to learn the craft. And I find that now, because there is such quick access to very small amount of information, there is the perception that they know, but there is no habit of research. And there is this constant exhibitionist attitude of recording every aspect of what you do. So no longer is an internal process. You put your shoes on and you record that, you put it in the Instagram. You put your makeup on, you record it. There's never a moment of reflection. So that's a concern I have, but again, it could be my age. And then the other part is the education itself. I think the technical demands keep growing. And for what I've seen, most schools take very little time to educate the mind. Like I said, most artists today don't know how to read or write music. Very few finish their education. And I think, again, that we can see reflected, as we discussed before, in how few ballet dancers are spokespersons on behalf of the art form. You see great people speaking on defense of theater, the Nick Heiners or Sam Mendes, or the importance of the investment on cinema. You see it also in literature, you see it even in opera, the Papanos of this world. Where are the intellectuals of our art form? And I think that's an important reflection to make.
Well, I think two of the intellectuals of our art form are sitting beside me. But
yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and it actually strikes me that I wonder what actually both of you think of the relationship between this internal life that you're saying is being depleted and the idea, which is prominent in just about every dance form I know, and certainly in ballet, where we've talked less about this today, but part of the internal part is a spiritual part. And even in Balanchine, which you had the machine that thinks, but you also had the dancers saying, it felt like a religion. And so there's a way in which the practice, which is almost monastic in its demands, at least in the training, is also a spiritual practice. And I don't mean that in a New Age way. I mean it in some other way. I'm not sure what, but it's been there for a long time, right? Like back to the 17th century and the origins of ballet, when there is really a sense that this is a way of elevating yourself towards God, and whether is there, where is that in all of this, or is that just showing my age or my historians' desire to sort of introduce these ideas that may not be as powerful to people today?
And sometimes I think, or I hope, again, always the optimist,
Yeah.
I hope that's the reaction that there is to come. As in, where is God in society today, right? Where is it? And you can see that people seem a little bit desperate to find new beliefs, even if they are all kinds of crazy beliefs. But people are looking for something to believe in. And obviously, the Romanticism came out of the Industrial Revolution, of the fear of the machine, of the fear of humans being less than the creation they have created. And so perhaps this whole pandemic and then artificial intelligence and this isolation and all these things will come around, and people will look for connectivity and for live performances. With the thing we did with Mere Mortals as well is after the show, we activated the front of the opera house with live DJ. People wouldn't leave. We had to shut down the lights so that they would leave the opera house because they were desperate to connect with each other and dance with each other. And so for me, that showed me that there's also that humanity that needs to be in a room with other humans and share a mystical experience. And that makes me believe that we will have a future.
You know, I was going to ask a final question, which I don't have to ask now. I was going to say that every cultural impresario has to be to some degree a prophet, meaning that they have to be able to imagine the yearnings of where their society wants to be just a few steps ahead and offer them an entry into that future. And I think I was going to ask you both to tell me what is the future about. But I think with this beautiful statement about one effort to do precisely that, we can invite questions from our audience. But first, please raise your hand. We have a few minutes for questions. I'm sorry, I went a little long, but I was just fascinated by every word. If you have a question for Jenny or Tamara, raise your hand and a representative will come to you with a mic to your seat. And when you receive your microphone, please introduce yourself, say your name, your affiliation with the Institute, and then ask your question. Thank you. But don't all be shy.
Hi. Hello. Thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful afternoon. I'm Rebecca Legier. I am a guest at the Institute. I am a professor of dance and choreography at Princeton University. So we are so honored to have you here. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the relationship between the spark of creation and the histories upon which creators are building in a moment, like that intersection between how we weave in past experience and craft and histories of forms in the body and move forward. And specifically with an eye to choreography, idea that a choreographer was born and not made. And how today are there structures to build choreographers? Often the name choreographer isn't even known in general culture. It's recently very forgotten and not even spoken of in Jesse Green's review of Justin Peck's Illinois on Broadway. So like there's some erasure around choreography and choreographers. And I would love, in the desire to build a generation of choreographers too, what do you see as the ways in which that can happen and is happening? And yeah, thank you.
So I'm not sure that I agree with all of your statement. I actually think that choreography as something that is some kind of God-given gift is a very modern interpretation of choreography. I think in the past, almost every dancer was a choreographer, and it was a normal practice. It was part of your tool, you know. You were a dancer, and sometimes you had to choreograph yourself something, and that's how Petit Pas started, you know.
Just the way you had to bring your own costume.
Exactly, exactly. So I actually feel, and I see it even more because, of course, in the flamenco dance, everybody's a choreographer. So that I feel that the demystifying approach is healthier, because I think the approach of a God-given gift made people fearful of even trying. And so what I am doing is I'm creating a lab at San Francisco Ballet, and trying to create residencies for successful choreographers to just play with us, so the dancers can just feel how it is to play without any end game. Also creating collaborations, so every choreographer that comes to create something also goes and does some kind of weekend experiment with ODC, a contemporary dance company in San Francisco, and us. And they have to also, the dancers, choreograph during that. And then hopefully we'll also start doing choreographic kind of workshops internally. But I think part of it is the demystifying of the tool, and to just say, it's just another practice. You have been practicing to be a dancer for 10 years, so it's gonna take a while. You know, you're gonna have to learn. You just have to start at some point without thinking that a choreographer is born and not learn. You know, it's just another thing. If you want to know how to knit, you have to start. You're not going to have the best scarf the first time you knit something, but eventually you'll have a hat. So that's how I see it.
This is so supported by, I mean, Balanchine himself was very, I mean, he even has said, you know, the choreographer doesn't exist. It's these people, the choreographer suggests. So there, again, there's this interaction between two people. It's not a choreographer and a dancer learning. It's, although there is that too. Sometimes. But mostly it's, you know, I'm reminded of an example that actually the theater director, Robert Wilson, told me that he was watching rehearsal with Balanchine and I think it was Allegra Kent. And he said, maybe you would try, you know, something like this. He did a movement. And she kind of did one of her wild things, completely different. And he said, exactly. and you know, so there's this sense, and he also, I mean, I think genuinely, I don't think it was a modesty or some kind of like game. He really did believe that it was in the interaction with the dancer that the choreography emerges, and that he had an analytic frame, she or he had some other, you know, had psychology, all of their personal and physical and emotional and spiritual character and quirks and ideas. So all of that is playing into that. That is the stuff of the choreography. So I agree with the demystification, and he certainly said always, you know, here's one of the great choreographers that we think of as one of the great choreographers of the 20th century, and he was. But what did that really mean? It meant for him, like, do the next one.
Yeah.
Do the next one. Keep going.
Practice.
Practice. It's not always going to be good. I'm just, you know, we're going to just try some things here.
I find it very interesting because the people that work with Kenneth Macmillan describe the same thing. Kenneth was always sitting in his chair and with a very small voice, but try lifting her over your shoulder. And then a dancer will do something to lift her over the shoulder. And he'll be like, now reverse it. That. And so when you learn the ballets, you feel in your body, whether that was Lynn Seymour or Antoinette Sibley, you know, Lynn Seymour or David Wall, or Antoinette Sibley and Anthony Dowell, completely different approach, physicality, partnering, everything is different, depending on who created the roles.
I mean, in a way, we have to get away from the idea of a dance as a work of art, like a painting, something that exists. It doesn't exist, back to your original point. It doesn't exist. It's just what happens on the stage now, and then it's gone.
It's interesting. One of the things that's really emerged is how different the relationship of ballet is to its canon than really any of the other art forms we've talked about. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Thank you. What a wonderful talk, fascinating. My name's Julian Grant. I'm a friend of the Institute. I'm a composer, but I did actually work with Christopher Gable at Northern Ballet, and we did new productions of Romeo and Juliet and Swan Lake, in which the music was sort of messed with. Which is what I wanted to ask you. Would you be very happy if you'd never heard any of these great ballets, these sort of warhorse ballets, Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, Nutcracker, Romeo and Juliet, ever again? Do you think it is their presence and their ubiquity overshadowing almost everything else you can do? Because the stories, the narratives that they have are very sort of fusty these days, are they not? I just would be interested to know on your views on that.
Well, do we want to throw the canon out altogether? No, I mean, that's not really the question, though, is it? I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's an argument to be made for that. And I guess the way I would see it is slightly different. I would see that, I mean, I suppose, and here I'm like, my hat as somebody who's trying to write about contemporary work as a critic, is that why do people still do those dances? Why? I mean, it's a good question. Why? They're often boring, and they've got not great music, and the costumes are old, and stories are not great. And so why are we, like Tamara and I were talking about this earlier, why are they doing them? So that, to me, the question is, why do they want to do that? What I see is that the classical ballet world, the self-described classical ballet world, is quite conservative today. And that's an interesting thing culturally and sort of socially, that we are in that position after having been through a 20th century in which a lot of those 19th century works were completely surpassed and overthrown. And so this sort of return to them is part of I think, a sign of some kind of deeply conservative impulse, both in the art form and perhaps in the audiences that are drawn to them. I don't know what you, as somebody who's running a company.
I mean, I think there are a few reasons to continue to do them. One is because many of those works, specifically Nutcracker, Swan Lake, Romeo and Juliet, are the first contact for many audience. So we see that thanks to San Francisco Ballet, Nutcracker is a Christmas tradition all over the States. And therefore, for grandparents to bring their children to the art form for the very first time, that's the key. So I wouldn't want to lose that. And that happens also with Swan Lake and those other titles, in that audiences that are fearful of the art form are willing to take a chance with a title that they believe they're going to understand. So I think until we are able to demystify the art form to the general public and not make them fearful of the experience of coming to ballet and feel that perhaps they're not going to understand, that they're not intellectually developed enough, or whatever it is that they think is necessary in order to enjoy the art form, we need to continue to provide things that are accessible. And the second is that even though the versions of those classics that we do today are in many ways very different from the original, they are still the best teacher of technique.
I agree with that completely.
So no dancer can have really strong technique until they've done Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, all those, because there is something about the coordination and the structure of petit pas works that teaches you, even if no one is able to explain it to you, just by repetition. If you literally learn solos of Sleeping Beauty as a student and you just repeat them, you will get better. And so I don't know why There's something about the structure of those solos, the coordination that it demands from you, whatever it is, it's just going to make you a better dancer. And so they will continue to be a tool in the development of the technical ability of ballet dancers.
And maybe the third reason to still do them is that often they do come with great scores.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You know, they come with great scores to not always, but
Yes.
Speaking of great scores, this does bring our conversation to a close, but we do have another treat for you, and also another anecdote. This is a fitting anecdote as we approach the end of our Oppenheimer year. This has been our Oppenheimer year here at the Institute, not because of any chronology, but because of a movie. Oppenheimer, in 1967, a few days before his death, asked George Balanchine to come to the Institute and advise him and talk with him about the music for his funeral. And that was the first time they met. And the music was Stravinsky's Requiem Canticles and Beethoven's Opus 131, the quartet in C-sharp minor. And so as you exit Wolfenson Hall today, you'll be accompanied by Stravinsky's Requiem Canticles, which has a beautiful ballet too. We hope to see you again for our final director's conversation of this year with Joyce DiDonato, May 3rd at 5 p.m. But first, thank you.
Thank you.